Your recipes, madame, are sorely lacking in purpose.
My recipes, monsieur, provide what's needed most, flavor. And would you please get out of my way?
I'm surrounded by amateurs.
Chefs, please, let's just get to our places. We don't need to make this unpleasant. Welcome, everyone. It's data time in the Chopped Kitchen. Now, I'm sure most of you have been seeing the commotion all day of two chefs arguing about what is the recipe for success in data. Well, it's time to settle that score. Two chefs, one course, and only one chance to leverage the data. And the challenge to use all three mystery basket ingredients to make a dish that pleases the customer and meets the mandates without time or resources running out. In other words, the chefs must use the resources in their baskets to make a data-rich meal that satisfies your hunger for business value. And of course, the renowned PANTRY is at their fingertips. This round is timed, and at the end, you will be judged on purpose, identified leaders, and governance structure. Our distinguished panel of judges will critique their work.
This is just not user-friendly.
Lacks a certain flavor.
There's a lot of possibility here, but I don't know where to go with this. There's data everywhere.
Who will win the award and who will be chopped? Chefs, who will win the award and who will be chopped? So, let's find out. Chefs, please open your baskets. Our three ingredients today are healthcare visits, unemployment rates, and zip code demographics. You have 2.5 minutes to prepare your meal, and your time starts now.
Butter. I must have butter and spices. Let me see what's in this precious pantry of data.
Lowered recidivism. The main part of my dish has to include lowered recidivism. But how? How can I make lowered recidivism part of my dish? Perhaps I steam the beets with a side of celery souffle.
Oh, bless their hearts. I have never seen so many spices and ingredients. My goodness. I plan on frying everything because that's how we do it in the South.
Oh, look at this quality of demographics data. How can I find the most succulent pieces? It is just a mess. Ooh la la, I know. I will make the data vinaigrette, the star of my dish. The vinaigrette will tie all the flavors together beautifully. Mwah!
Anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything. Well, I have all the data I need from that splendid pantry, but where is a blender, y'all? How can I puree my mashed potatoes like I do back home? Well, I just don't know how to use all this highfalutin equipment.
Oh, sacre bleu, I have burned the hors d'oeuvres!
I am sorry to say, only 12 seconds left, chefs. Audience, if you'll please help me with the countdown. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up, chefs. Please step back. Chef Francois, Chef Polly, you have arrived at the chopping block of today's challenge. Please, tell us what you prepared. Chef Francois.
Bonjour, Georges. Today, I have made for you a soup of lowered recidivism with a data vinaigrette salad and a little healthcare soufflé to help with digestion. Voila!
And Chef Polly?
Well, I'm from the South, so I know good fried chicken when I taste it. And y'all, this is some good fried chicken with celery and beet puree for a sweet and salted dish that will just tickle your innards.
What is this? This is not even delicioso. Where is the harmony on the plate?
The harmony is in your mouth while you're eating it. Now, my presentation might need a little work, but who puts vinaigrette on a beet salad?
Look what I had to work with.
Chefs, please, there's no need to argue anymore. You know, you'll learn that in successful data challenges, the dishes are better when you work together. But now it's time for the judges to deliberate about what you've created. But before we ask the chefs to step down, how about a nice round of applause for their efforts?
Well, everyone knows your souffle was burned.
I was focused on the purpose. Yours was nothing but a mess.
Well, I concentrated on flavors. That's what matters most. And my dish is delicious.
We'll see about that.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the former CHOP champion and pioneer of leveraging data in strategic business planning, Miss Barbara Halsey from the Department of Delegata.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. And thank you to our studio audience for cheering our chefs along. Hopefully this has been a nice little aperitif after your noon meal. What we do recognize with both of our chefs is that there aren't any winners or losers. I think you all will agree that their first iteration of their data dish was a good iteration. We know that anytime you're dealing with data, there are going to be challenges along the way. Mistakes will be made, lessons will be learned, and that's our focus for the remainder of our time with you this afternoon. We want to talk to two leaders who are no strangers in the data kitchen. So I'm going to ask the other two master chefs to join me now at the stage. Russ Nichols has been serving up solutions for CDCR in his role as the Director of Enterprise Information Services since January of 2010. Prior to joining CDCR, Russ served at the State Controller's Office and the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. Notably, Russ directed the successful implementation of SOAMS, the largest offender management solution in the United States. This electronic offender management information system and electronics records management system supports over 53,000 users at more than 50 institutions and administrative sites across California. Adam Dondro, former Assistant Secretary for External Affairs at the California Technology Agency, now serves as Assistant Director of the Department of Social Services, where he's charged with horizontal integration of health and human services programs. In this chief cook and bottle washer position, Adam leads the department's cross-division analysis of horizontal integration opportunities and provides executive-level vision and strategic direction for this effort. He works closely with Covered California, the counties, the Office of Systems Integration, Department of Healthcare Services, Department of Aging, and the federal government, as well as other stakeholders to deliver business value. Okay, so on with our show. We're going to spend some time talking with Adam and Russ about their data challenges and what they see as recipes for success. And we'll have time at the end of our conversation with them for you to ask them some questions and to pick the brains of the chefs. We know that getting business value out of data is a hot topic for all of you at the state. And in addition to today's session, Delegata will be hosting a very focused panel session on June 21st. So you have information on the back of your flyer about that session. In addition, we're asking you to help us understand what your questions are. So you're going to see a QR code, a tiny URL, and for those of you who really aren't into technology, you also have a piece of paper that you can apply pen to And you can slip it in the question and answer box at the end of our session today to help us understand again what your main questions are so we're prepared for the 21st. Each of you who have attended the session today will be receiving an invitation to that meeting, and we'll be following up with you for RSVPs. Okay, so let's get started on our discussion with our experts here today. So during our chopped competition, you saw our chefs working to incorporate the 3 essential ingredients in their data recipes, hoping to come up with culinary success. Russ and Adam, let's focus first on how our chefs and how you have used purpose, identified leaders, and governance structure to drive successful outcomes on data initiatives. Our 2 chefs took very different approaches in the data kitchen. When you're faced with a data initiative, where do you start?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things I really liked from Chef Francois was that he looked for that purpose first. And that's something that we really talk about as everyone knows they've got data issues. Everyone knows they want to see the bigger picture, but where do you start? How do you go about it? And the key is, what are you trying to achieve, right? Because you can do a lot with data. You can focus down very deep into one specific project or one specific program. You can be looking at very high level, big picture conglomeration. And the way that you approach that, the folks you bring into the room, the leaders you need on board, those are all going to change depending on what that purpose is. And so we really wanted to emphasize that you need to decide, what is it that you're trying to do? Why are you looking at data? Because sometimes you just start down a road. Well, we need better data, and you start working on it without even knowing why. And so really focusing in on that purpose, I think, is key. And you heard from Chef Polly, I'm going to fry it because that's how we do it in the South. And that's a really good way to get exactly what you've always gotten.
So one of the things you saw in the demonstration, both chefs started with something in mind at the end, but they took very different approaches. One was very precise and goal-oriented. The other one was very opportunistic. You saw Polly go in and look at the pantry, and there was data of all sorts that she could combine. We have that in our real-life scenario. In my organization, we serve an offender population of about 170,000 folks across both the prison system and our parole system. We have an immense amount of data. It can be very overwhelming. And if we tried to slice that and figure out exactly one thing that we wanted to do or one scenario, we'd come up with a bunch of great ideas, but for each one of those, we'd probably also find the missing ingredient. In other words, we don't have the right data. It's not perfect enough. But to Adam's point, sometimes you have to jump in and figure out if there's a substitution that you can make. If you can, instead of using buttermilk, if you could use milk and lemon juice. In our case, we may not have information around historical information around a program or a policy. And we might have to combine that with something else that can substitute for that or be an approximation. And keeping that end in mind, is it something that has to be that precise? Could that estimation or approximation get us to where we need to be? Is an 80% confidence level good enough? And if we jump in and start playing with that data, modeling the data, and gaining what we can out of it, maybe we learn some lessons along the way and find out that what we really thought we needed, we didn't need in the first place.
Great.
And you can build off that, right? As you start to roll down that hill, you get those thoughts in mind, and then you look for the burning issue. You know, is your director up in arms about an article that was on the front page that you can drive towards some specific data to answer questions that came up? Or maybe you've got some requests in front of the legislature that are hot burning issues, or there's a new program that's being started up and you need to understand the population that's being served. Look for those things that are already on leadership's mind so that it's easier for you to make the case, because making a case to leadership about data in general is not a great place to start. That's not what's on their mind, and it's not what should be on their mind. They're focusing on the business side. So you find that burning issue that they're going to more readily buy into, and then you can take it on the back end and work on that data piece. And in Health and Human Services Agency, over the last couple of years, we've really ramped up our open data efforts. So we have an agency-wide open data effort now with every single department and office posting data onto that portal. That all started out with the Department of Public Health and one particular leader who was very adamant that this was an important functionality for them. And instead of just saying, I'm going to do it on my own, they got leadership buy-in and they said, here's what I'm doing. Let me bring folks together, and we'll talk about governance a little later. Let's have this discussion together. I'll lead the way show you where the value is, and that iterated all the way up to an agency-wide portal.
So I noticed that our chefs were using all fresh ingredients, but they didn't have a sink up here to clean them with. So the topic that comes up often is, how clean does your data need to be before you can really use it?
How many people have heard that? We can't do this because the data is not perfect, because I don't know everything, or I don't have every transaction back for 30 years in time. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we're taking that approach, we'll never get to a product. Sometimes you use what you have, and that helps you figure out where to invest in data cleansing exercises, new data collection mechanisms, maybe changing the question. But if you're waiting to have the perfect tool, the perfect blender, if you can't switch to a different type of tool or a different mechanism, then you're predetermined to essentially be frozen in place. Sometimes you use what you have. You do the best that you can. You use a tool or the tools that you have to demonstrate competence, build that confidence that you can move forward, and things will start to build from there.
Then you say, imagine what I could have done if I had a sink.
Right, yeah. So the caveat, of course, is get as much dirt off as you can, but garbage in, garbage out. So you want to make sure that you're using the cleanest data you can possibly use in anything that you approach.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pendulum type of conversation. You can't wait till it's perfect, but you can't start with absolute garbage either.
Great.
So in your data, there is probably a sweet spot in the middle where you have usable information that if you combine it with other things that you have access to, you can pull out some really interesting analytics and decision-making tools that you never realized that you actually had. But you get to that by doing it, by experimenting and finding out what you could produce.
So I'm picking up some themes here. You may not have all the ingredients or a recipe to follow. So there's some art involved in being a good data chef. You need to dive in and see what will work and what won't. You may have to modify your recipe a few times before you come up with the right souffle. And you have to learn from every iteration. Great, thanks. Adam, you've had some experience with smaller departmental level projects as well as agency-wide projects. From your experience, what are some of the challenges that you've faced?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the key challenges is in that effort to get started, figuring out who do you bring to the table, who needs to be a part of this. And part of that goes back to the purpose, know why you're doing this, affects who should be part of that. But also it affects how you look at the data, right? So you can have the same 3 sets of data that the chefs were looking at. One goes to fried chicken, one goes to a souffle with a salad, right? That happens with our data. So if you bring external partners to the table, they're going to be looking for you to pull different information out of that than if you go to your executive leadership in your department. And so getting your mind wrapped around what is it that I'm going for helps you answer that question of who do I need to get to the table and how do I sell this to them, right? Because the business case that you're making is going to change. A lot of people start with the business case, right? And then if you pull the wrong people into the room, that business case falls flat and suddenly you've lost all that momentum that you had created.
So I know you've both had the experience of working internally where there may be nuances in policies from the different departments or different agencies that you work with. How do you overcome that challenge?
Well, sometimes it's just realizing that things won't line up the way you expect. Earlier I'd mentioned maybe you don't have some of the data that you thought you expected, that you need to answer a question. So let me give you a real life example. So I work in the correctional organization, and anybody that's seen Orange is the New Black, or for some of us more in my age group, The Longest Yard, a long time ago, not the bad one that was a couple of years ago. There's a concept called solitary confinement. It's not what we call it in our prison system, but the concept is the same. When you do something bad while in prison, you go to jail inside prison. In other words, you're put in solitary confinement, you live by yourself, you're in lockup, for lack of a better way to describe it. What we've learned over the years is when somebody goes into solitary confinement or lockup, they come out just as able and willing to commit bad acts as when they went in. In other words, we're not doing anything on the rehabilitative side. It's just the punishment side. So they're taken out of the population, put in solitary. So we've changed policy. We don't use solitary confinement like we used to. Now, what do we do with data about that? We made a significant policy change, and now we want to measure that. Did that have the outcome we intended? The problem was before we changed the policy, we didn't have a system or a mechanism in place where we tracked the reason someone was in solitary in the first place. So comparing that to a change in policy where now they're pushed back into the general population, it's not an apples and oranges conversation. We're tracking it at a very granular level of detail now, but before, all I had was the fact that there was some sort of a violent event in a prison. It could have been a food fight in the cafeteria, it could have been an assault, it could have been a bunch of things, but we had no mechanism to compare that. So sometimes it's backing off to a level of lack of precision and looking almost at trends and big picture data and trying to extrapolate into areas where you can forecast or tune policies based on what you do know, not necessarily on what you don't know. But that also gives you the opportunity to look at other things. When I start talking about violence in prison, there are a bunch of other things that influence that. What's being served in the cafeteria that day? Believe it or not, that matters. Or what's the weather outside? After I say it, you'll probably nod, but who in here was thinking that violence actually is cyclical in a prison? In other words, when it's really hot outside, violence goes up. Guess what? When it's really cold outside, violence goes up. Because we don't let people outside, we shove them all into a gym, a room about this size, as opposed to an acre-sized lot where they get to go out to an exercise yard. But when it's really hot, they congregate in shaded areas. So if you start to overlay that with the violence information we have, we might find out the change in policy was actually not what drove the violence, it was a weather pattern. And so those things that you expected going in, when you actually start to look at the data you have and what you can lay on top of it, you might come to very, very different conclusions than you started with. And when you work with data, it's very different than a lot of our normal IT systems where we have a prescribed outcome. It's more of being the kind of a scientific method of try it and observe the result. And sometimes the result you get will be very different than what you expected. Sometimes you are trying to justify or support something. Sometimes you're just trying to learn things that allow you to change your environment. One of the things that we changed, if you think about grade school recess, when you let everybody out on the playground at the same time, you have a bunch of groups that interact and potentially in bad ways in a prison. But if you cycle that, first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, those groups don't get a chance to interact and you cut down on violence. So those type of things, when we actually started to dive into it, look at times of day, look at weather patterns, we actually got more interesting information out of that than what we started with, which was a change in a solitary confinement policy.
Yeah, so I like the idea of, again, as you iterate, as you understand your data, as you begin to look at the situations that you're analyzing, you're going to learn more information and potentially shift in your purpose, modify your purpose, and in fact, that may inform policy decisions in the long run. So let's talk a little bit about tools. We saw Chef Polly lose some focus because she didn't have the mixer that she needed for her precious mashed potatoes. What about having the right tools?
Yeah, so I always say don't get caught up on the tool. If you get that purpose in mind, if you find that use case, you can find a way to do something. Maybe it's going to be more staff intensive than if you had the right tool to do it, but don't focus on the tool. And certainly don't believe that you need $1 million tool just to analyze your data. Maybe down the road, when you figure out where you're going after you've been through those iterations, you'll find something that really does provide value for that investment. But to the point of expect burnt hors d'oeuvres, it's always going to happen. If you start up front with saying, I need this specific equipment, more than likely you're going to get halfway down the road and realize you're not doing exactly what you thought you were doing. And maybe you get lucky and you still need that tool, or maybe it still serves the purpose for the new goal you're going for. But just as likely, you're going to end up kind of changing that path. A similar burnt hors d'oeuvres example for Health and Human Services, we were looking at welfare to work data at Department of Social Services, and we didn't end up, we were doing exactly what we thought we were until somebody looked at it and said, this doesn't seem right. What do you mean? It's all right here, it's just pretty self-explanatory. No, let me pull up the county data. That's not what we say. And so we found out by going through the process, everyone was looking at different numbers. They were defining things in different ways. And at the state level, it was just getting consolidated, and we didn't even know that it was this mishmash of apples and oranges and pears, right? Was leadership happy about that? No, definitely not. But had we not started down that path, we wouldn't have caught it, gone back, and went through this exact process to say, let's get some definitions, let's get some standards in place, let's understand it. And now, down the road, now we're back where we thought we were started, right? With that good quality data to do it again. And so if we'd gone down the road of tools, we wouldn't have had what we needed to do because we didn't know that that's where we were going to end up.